So we'll be talking about how to reshape your data. And what I mean by reshaping it is making it either longer or making it wider. So making your data longer, that would mean you increase how many rows it has. So you add rows. And you often decrease the number of columns when you make your data longer. But it's mostly about having more rows than before. That would be making your data longer. And the command for that is pivot_longer, which I'll show you in detail in a second. And the opposite of that would be making your data wider. So that would be decreasing the number of rows, and often that means increasing the number of columns, right? So those are the two opposites, pivoting longer and pivoting to a wider format. And you will mostly, if you want to tidy data, you will mostly use pivot longer. So it's common that you download data or get data from somewhere that needs to be pivoted to a longer format. Pivot wider is more for creating summary tables or kind of reformatting summary tables. It's not used as much for cleaning data, for making it tidy. Okay, so the example we'll use here is this questionnaire data, so this animal survey data. If we take another look at this, if we go all the way to the end, we have the two columns, cats and dogs. So this is how much do people like cats and how much do they like dogs. And it's really common with this questionnaire data that you get it in a format where each participant, the data from each participant is on its own row, right? And that's, in this case, that's not really tidy because we want the dog and cat ratings to be different. We would like a column that contains cat or dog, and then we would like an extra column which contains the rating, right? So instead of having two different columns, one called cats, one called dogs, we would like a column that's called animals, and then that column contains either cats or dogs. And we would like a separate column for the rating that these two animals got. So what we need to do, or what we would like to have, is a data frame where each participant turns up twice, because for each participant, we need cats, dogs with the ratings. So what we need is more rows. So what we need is pivot longer, right? So pivot longer, the arguments that it has is first, which columns should be reshaped. So which columns are concerned here, which need to be reshaped. Then the next argument is names to. So this is what should happen with cats and dogs in this case. So what should happen with the original column names? Which new column should they be stored in, right? So we want cats and dogs to be stored in a column named animal. So names to animal. And then the last argument that we'll discuss here is values to. So this is what should happen with these numbers, what should happen with these ratings, what should the column name be for those. So that's values to, and we're calling that rating. So if we run that, you can first of all see this is now 24 rows. So I didn't overwrite the original data frame. This is just a preview. And for pivoting especially, we'd really recommend looking at a preview first before you save anything. So the original animal survey data frame has 12 observations, so 12 rows. And here we have 24, so that looks good. That's what we would like. And now you can see this all occurs, or we all get this all twice. And if we go all the way to the end, we now have a column called animal and a column called rating, just like we wanted it to happen. And now animal contains either cats or dogs, and then the rating for cats or dogs, right? So from two separate columns, one for cats, one for dogs, with the rating, we've now gone to an animal column and a rating column. And the reason why, so this is how we would tidy data. If it's too wide, we would try and make it longer. And this is going to be useful later for plotting or for running models. And it's really common with this questionnaire data that it's actually too long and needs to be reshaped, too wide and needs to be reshaped to be longer. So let's have another example. This is another new data set, but it's a really short and easy one, I promise. So here, I'm just going to open it and show you. That's the wrong one. Here, this one. Yeah, so here we have, these are all the sentences that were read in our self-paced reading experiment. That's exactly the same. That's what we discussed in the self-paced reading data. And these are acceptability judgments, averages. So you asked a couple of people, is this an acceptable sentence? And these are already the averages. So for example, if you read the sentence about the barking cat, that gets a really low 1.1 rating. But if you look at sentences like, let's see, a tomcat, that gets a high acceptability rating. So that's more acceptable than the barking cat sentence. Okay, so you can see that this is in an extremely wide format. So you can see that this actually has one row only. And it has the sentences as the variable names. And what we would like instead is we would like it to look like this. So we would like to have a column that's called sentence, where we have all the different sentences. And then we would like the rating to be next to that. Okay. So again, we need to pivot longer. So pivot to a longer format where we have more rows and fewer columns. So here, again, we need to use pivot longer. And then for calls, I can actually say everything, because here every column needs to be pivoted, needs to be reshaped, not just the two columns we had before with cats and dogs, but every single column needs to be reshaped. All variables are concerned. So we can put everything here. And then the names, so the old or the current variable names, which are the sentences. So here, those are the variable names, the sentences that were rated. We want these to be put in a variable called sentence. And then the values we would like to be put in a variable called rating. And then if we run that, we end up with this data frame where we have a column called sentence, a variable called sentence with all the sentences, and then the rating next to it in its own column. Okay. So that's pivot longer. And again, pivot longer, that's what you often need to use if you have untidy data. So if you download data from somewhere, if you download questionnaire data, that's a really typical case where you have to pivot it to longer. And as I was saying, pivot wider, the opposite of pivot longer, that's more commonly used when you have a summary table and you want to change something about the way it looks. So what I'm doing first here is I'm using this corpus data that I have with animals, so with cat and dog, and with these different colloquiums that I have, and I'm just counting how often you get cat with each of these words. So ginger cat 8 times, for example, playing cat 4 times, and then the same happens, of course, for dog, so barking dog 9 times, and so on. Okay, so that's a nice summary table, but we could use pivot wider to reshape that. So here the first part is exactly the same as before, and then I'm just piping that into a pivot wider call. And here we just need 2 arguments. So here we need names from. So where should the new column names come from, right? And they should come from this, from the colloquiums. And then values from, so where should the corresponding values come from? And here R calls, so when you run this count command, R calls the column N. So when you ask R to count something, it'll call the column N, right? So here the values come from N, so let's take a look at how that looks. Okay, and now you can see that this is a much wider data frame. So now you can see, okay, cat and dog, how often does cat appear with because, how often does it appear with contented, and the same for dog, right? You can go over here to see the actual values for dog. So that way, it's more of a reformatting issue. That way you don't have cat and dog repeated a bunch of times, but instead you have both just once. And you can directly compare the frequencies for each of the collocates.